In case you wanna buy a car or have dinner.
In a world of secrets and lies, one man's charm hides a chilling truth, a master manipulator who deceives everyone, from lovers to strangers, in a twisted game of trust and betrayal.
Hey folks, Maya here. Heads up, there are spoilers ahead, so grab your snacks and let's dive into today's story.
Based on a true story, the film places us in the United Kingdom of the 90s, at a time of political tension when the Irish Republican Army, IRA, began planting various bombs in England. In response, the British Security Service, MI5, recruited several unacknowledged spies to stay informed about suspected Irish terrorists. With that premise, we meet Robert Freegard, a Brit who works as a bartender in a small community. But behind this charming young man is a first-rate con artist. At the end of a shift at the bar, Robert convinces a group of unsuspecting students that he is an MI5 agent and that a group from the IRA is hiding in the town while pretending to be students. Therefore, Sophie, Ian, and May agree to help him and try to befriend those supposed terrorists. After becoming friends with Neil, one of the targets, they convince him to go out to the bar while Ian inspects his room. To Robert's misfortune, Ian finds no revealing evidence. In the early hours, Robert surprises his spies, informing them that the enemy has discovered them and that he has to take them to a safe place immediately. 9 years later, we see Robert working as a salesman at a luxury car dealership, where one day he sees Alice Archer, a talented lawyer who usually passes through the area on her way to work. When he sees her again, the man can't resist greeting her, but she rejects him immediately because she had just been out drinking with a client. The next day, Alice apologizes for her rude behavior, and Robert not only accepts her apology, but offers to drive her to work. Upon arriving at her destination, she intended to make it clear that she wasn't looking for a relationship, though she falls for his charms and agrees to a date. However, when the time comes, Robert never shows up to pick her up. The following day, she is forced to answer his call, just to make it clear that he will not get a second chance. But then Robert reveals that last night, he had to take his father to the hospital. He also gives her a painting as an offering of apology. Alice has no choice but to receive him in her home, and although she is initially somewhat tense, they end up having a rather pleasant but brief improvised date, since Robert leaves without giving further explanation. On another day, after a pleasant walk at the lighthouse, the protagonist once again manages to capture Alice's attention, and they end up making love at her place. Once finished, she is quite satisfied until she sees a certain Sophie calling Robert's phone. Robert quickly leaves, saying he needs to see his father. As a result, Alice decides to hire Phil, a private investigator, giving him the only information she has about Robert, his business card, which shows the last name Hansen. Not long after, the detective tells her that Robert Hansen is a complete ghost with no documentation whatsoever as a citizen. Meanwhile, Robert meets with Sophie, who was staying in a cheap motel where she was keeping records of guests in search of terrorists. Later, Alice decides to test her doubts about Robert by agreeing to another date on which she asks too many questions. He quickly realizes she is very suspicious, so he has no choice but to confess that he is a secret MI5 agent. Of course, she doesn't believe him at first, but Robert continues, explaining that his real last name is Freegard and that Sophie is an agent whom he is supervising. He also informs her that, according to the protocol for official partners of agents, his superiors will have to investigate her. Speaking of partners, in the days that follow, the two become closer, traveling together to several places and sharing many intimate moments. At one point, Robert confesses that in a few years he would love to have children and retire from the Secret Service to really dedicate himself to renting out cars on her side. Alice is not a big fan of her job and dreams of being an entrepreneur. It might sound silly to some, but not to him, or really to anyone. The next step in their relationship is meeting Richard and Madeline, Alice's wealthy parents, who question Robert about his future and nearly faint when they hear his plan to rent cars together with their daughter. They make it clear to her that she cannot leave her career. Later, Robert meets with Sophie to reveal that, after many years of service as an unrecognized agent, he has officially secured a position in the Secret Service. Meanwhile, Alice receives new information from Phil, who reveals that Robert had a minor court case involving charges of harassment of a minor named Julie. When Alice reunites with Robert, he warns her that his superiors might feed her false information about him to test her loyalty, so she needn't worry. Moreover, he tells her, "I love you," for the first time, dispelling Alice's suspicions, but only for a while, because she decides to call Mrs. Harper, the mother of the girl Robert supposedly harassed. Afterwards, Alice tells him she knows everything about his brief romance with Julie and how Julie demanded a lot of money from his parents for a wedding that never happened. Robert clarifies that he decided to break up with Julie because she drank too much and he took her to rehab, which is why she needed to request money. However, Julie escaped from that place, and when Robert kept following her, she decided to report him to the police. Then the protagonist warns Alice that whoever told her that story also works for the Secret Service and is in charge of loyalty tests. He storms out, furious because he had already warned her about that assessment, but she believed everything. Seconds later, Alice receives a call from a man named Paul, a contact of Mrs. Harper and Sophie's father, who tells her that Robert has kidnapped his daughter. Alice decides to visit him to hear the whole story, discovering that Sophie was kidnapped along with her friends May and Ian, the latter being the only one who returned home. Paul and his wife also tell her that their daughter called them a few years ago, asking them to stop looking for her since she was on an important mission. Although she did ask for quite a bit of money, therefore, her parents think Robert has brainwashed her. Meanwhile, Robert prepares Sophie's new identity as an official agent, naming her Alice Archer at night. The first thing Alice does when she gets home is apologize to Robert for doubting him, returning his "I love you," although, in reality, she has ulterior motives behind so much affection. On another day, Alice stays glued to her computer instead of focusing on her client, receiving a notification that £120,000 has been withdrawn from her bank account. Of course, she did not make that withdrawal. Immediately, she returns home, where she gets a visit from Detective Sunny, who reveals to her that Robert was never an MI5 agent. By that point, she already knew. Sunny calls Robert to question him about the bank fraud, but the con man calmly explains that he only withdrew the funds to start their car rental project, something they had supposedly agreed to long ago. Shortly after, Sophie feels compelled to have sex with Robert, believing that is her only path to joining the Secret Service. Continuing her training, Robert leaves her in an abandoned area, where she has to manage on her own because that's what real spies do. Back with Alice, we see that her disappointment with Robert has led her to underperform at work, so a board representative indirectly suggests she should resign. That night, while venting at a bar, Alice gets an unexpected call from Robert, who apologizes for robbing her and confesses that she is the only person he has truly loved, but he hangs up. Seconds later, on another day, a desperate Alice asks Phil to help track down Robert, but the detective makes it clear that the last thing he wants is to get close to that con man, calling him an evil person who will never change. Still, Alice begins an investigation on her own, visiting Ian's farm. Ian confesses that Robert made him carry out spy missions for years because he hoped to become someone special, but one day, Robert disappeared, along with Sophie and May Hansen, a surname the con man stole. Upon discovering that he kidnapped yet another girl, Alice immediately seeks out Sunny, who begins searching for information about May. Meanwhile, Robert has moved somewhere else, where he has resumed his persona as a salesman and has managed to woo Jenny, an American psychologist, to whom he reveals his real job. After that, he convinces her to accept a vacancy as an MI5 analyst. But first, she needs to pay off her huge $80,000 student debt, so she has no choice but to ask her parents for money. Back with Alice, we see that she and Sunny have located May's house and discover that she has had 2 daughters with Robert, who visits them only occasionally. The problem is that May still believes Robert is a secret agent and that they are testing her loyalty. However, Alice convinces May that Robert is in danger and that they need to know where he is. So May gives them one of his notebooks. Patiently, Alice calls most of the phone numbers in that notebook, but none are recognized as real. The next day, she shows up at the US Embassy with Sunny, where they learn that Jenny had been missing for 3 weeks until she called her parents to request money so she could get a job with her boyfriend, Robert Freegard. Hence, Alice starts calling every number in the notebook again, but this time under the supervision of the US agent Sandy. They managed to connect with Sophie's disposable phone, since she had been living like a vagrant for days and believed Robert would be the only one to call her. Alice convinces her that she has come on behalf of MI5 and that Sophie has passed the test. Meanwhile, Robert tosses Jenny's antidepressants into the fire to motivate her to overcome her emotional problems. But she starts suffering withdrawal, a perfect condition for him to keep manipulating her. Finally, Alice and her colleagues manage to find Sophie underneath the bridge and must continue pretending they are from the Secret Service so as not to shock the poor girl. Thanks to that, she reveals the location of one of the many safe houses Robert sent her to, one that seemed like a real home. While Robert answers a phone call from Jenny, Learning that her parents have transferred the money, the protagonist heads to the bathroom, where he had left her so she could vomit as much as she needed. However, when he tries to give her the good news, he finds her completely unresponsive. At the same time, Alice manages to reach his safe house with the help of Sophie's directions. When Alice comes face to face with him, Robert swears she was the first woman he truly loved and tries to convince her to run away together, though he flees the moment he spots her police companions. Sophie, having heard all his lies, stops him by blocking his path with Sonny's car. At last, Robert is arrested, and paramedics take Jenny away for recovery afterwards. Alice and Sonny reunite Sophie with her parents, creating a moving moment. 2 years later, we see that Robert's trial is still underway, and of course Alice does not testify in his favor. Speaking of Alice, she has left law for good and is now the owner of a company that rents luxury cars. In prison, one of the guards asks Robert if he is an MI5 agent. Since the inmates are circulating that rumor, the conman doesn't answer clearly. After all, it is part of his job. The guard promises to help him whenever he needs it. In the epilogue, it is revealed that Robert was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping, theft, and fraud. Although his kidnapping charges were annulled after an appeal, and he was released in 2009, since then, more accusations have continued to emerge against him, and the true extent of his crimes remains unknown. So that's it. If you enjoyed this movie, share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to check out the recommended movie on your screen right now. Watch it and join Mahi's Movie Recaps.